I want to start by telling you something about the way I found out. Because most stories like this, stories about people discovering something terrible inside their own home, most of them start with a dramatic moment, a loud sound, a door swinging open by itself, something obviously, unmistakably wrong. Mine didn't start that way. Mine started with a smell, a very ordinary, very easy to ignore smell that I noticed one morning while brushing my teeth, something slightly damp, something that didn't belong in a bathroom that I kept clean. Something faint enough that I told myself it was the drain, or the grout between the tiles, or just the way old buildings smell when the weather changes. I told myself that for 3 weeks. And then I found out what it actually was, and I have not felt completely safe inside any home since. I moved into the house in late September. It was a rental, a small 2-story house in a quiet neighborhood about 20 minutes from the city center. Old street, old trees, the kind of neighborhood where people have lived for decades and know each other's names. The house itself had been built in the late 1950s and had been a rental property for the last 15 years or so, cycling through different tenants without anyone staying longer than a couple of years. I didn't ask too many questions about why people kept leaving. I was just happy to have found something affordable with a small backyard and enough space for my home office. The house had 2 bedrooms, a living room, a kitchen, and 1 full bathroom on the upper floor. The bathroom was small the way bathrooms in old houses tend to be, tight, functional, with black and white tile on the floor, a clawfoot tub that had been updated with a shower attachment at some point, and a large mirror above the vanity that took up most of one wall. The mirror was the first thing I noticed when the landlord showed me the bathroom during the walkthrough. It was bigger than you'd expect for a bathroom that size. Floor to ceiling almost, framed in dark wood, covering the entire wall above and around the sink. Old and slightly cloudy at the edges the way old mirrors get, but solid and well mounted. The landlord said it had always been there. Part of the original house. I thought it looked nice. I thought it gave the small bathroom a feeling of more space. I moved in that weekend and I didn't think about the mirror again for almost a month. My life in the house was quiet and routine from the beginning. I worked from home 3 days a week, went into the office the other 2. I cooked simple meals, kept the house reasonably clean, watched things on my laptop in the evenings, went to bed at a sensible hour. I had a cat. A gray tabby named Oliver, who had been with me for 4 years and who had, in those 4 years, established himself as the most relaxed and unbothered animal I had ever encountered. Nothing scared Oliver. He slept through thunderstorms. He ignored strange sounds. He was the kind of cat that made you feel more settled just by being nearby, because his complete indifference to everything seemed like evidence that the world was fine. I mention Oliver because of what he started doing about 2 weeks after we moved in. He started sitting outside the bathroom door and staring at it. Not scratching, not meowing, just sitting, perfectly still, staring at the door with a kind of focused, unblinking attention that cats sometimes give to things that humans can't perceive. He would sit there for 20 minutes at a time, sometimes longer, before eventually getting up and walking away, as if he had simply decided that whatever he was watching had gone. I noticed it and I thought nothing of it. Cats do strange things. Oliver had gone through phases before, staring at walls, fixating on corners of rooms, sitting in inexplicable spots for no apparent reason. I assumed he was hearing something in the pipes or watching a spider I couldn't see. I scratched him behind the ears and went about my day. I think about that now, how easy it is to dismiss the things that animals try to tell us. The smell started around the beginning of October. The first time I noticed it, I was brushing my teeth before bed. It was subtle, the kind of thing you catch for a second and then lose, and you're not sure afterward if you actually smelled it or imagined it. Damp, slightly stale, like a room that hadn't had its window open in a long time. I checked the area around the sink, looked under it for any sign of a leak. Nothing visible. I checked the grout along the base of the tub. Dry. I sniffed the drain. Not it! I went to bed thinking I'd look more carefully in the morning. In the morning the smell was gone. This pattern repeated itself over the following days. The smell would appear in the evening, faint and brief, and be gone by morning, always in the bathroom, always that same damp, closed-in quality. Never strong enough to be alarming, never quite absent enough to be dismissed. I mentioned it to a friend who suggested it might be a mold issue inside the wall. I bought some mold spray and treated the areas around the tub and under the sink. The smell continued. I told myself the mold treatment needed time to work. I was very good during those weeks at telling myself things. The thing that finally made me pay attention, really pay attention, happened on a Thursday night in the third week of October. I was getting ready for bed. It was late, just past midnight. I had been working longer than intended, and I was tired in that specific way where your eyes feel heavy but your mind is still moving. I went into the bathroom, turned on the light, and stood at the sink to wash my face. I was leaning forward, eyes closed, water running, when I heard it. A sound coming from behind the mirror. It was so quiet that if the tap had been running at full pressure, I would never have heard it over the water. But I had the tap running low, just a trickle while I let the water warm up. And in that quiet, I heard it clearly. A shifting sound, the sound of something, someone, adjusting their weight, the soft compression of something under pressure being redistributed. The exact sound, if you have ever heard it, of a person who has been sitting very still for a long time and has just moved slightly. I stood up straight, water dripping from my face. Eyes open, the mirror looked back at me. I stood there for a moment, completely still, telling myself what I had heard was the house settling. Old houses make sounds, wood and plaster and old bones contracting in the cold. Normal, expected, nothing. I dried my face and went to bed. But I lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling, and the sound played back in my head over and over with a clarity that made it very difficult to believe I had imagined it. I didn't go back into the bathroom until the next morning, and when I did, I stood in front of the mirror for a long time before I did anything else. I looked at it properly, maybe for the first time since I'd moved in. Really looked at it. The frame was dark wood, thick and solid, mounted flush against the wall. The mirror itself sat perfectly flat, no gaps around the edges that I could see. No obvious seam between the mirror and the wall. But the mirror was large, much larger than it needed to be for a bathroom this size. And now that I was looking carefully, I noticed something that I had completely missed before. The mirror had hinges. On the left side of the frame, almost invisible against the dark wood, there were two hinges, small and old, slightly oxidized, the kind of hardware that had been there so long it had become part of the furniture in the eye's mind. You stop seeing it the way you stop seeing a light switch you've used 1,000 times. The mirror was a door. I reached out and touched the right side of the frame, pressed my fingers against the wood, felt along the edge for some kind of catch or handle. My fingers found a small indentation, a shallow groove worn into the wood by years of use, worn smooth the way surfaces get when hands have touched them regularly for a long time. I pressed my thumb into the groove. The mirror swung open. I want to try to describe what I saw and felt in the next few seconds as accurately as I can, because those seconds are burned into my memory in a way that few moments in my life are. Behind the mirror was a room, not a cavity, not a storage space, a room, small, maybe 6 feet wide and 8 feet deep, the ceiling the same height as the bathroom ceiling. No window, no light source other than what spilled in from the bathroom behind me, but a room, with a floor, with walls, with a ceiling, and it was not empty. Along the right wall there was a sleeping bag laid out flat, with a pillow at one end. The sleeping bag was dark green and it was not dusty. It was not old and abandoned. It looked recently used. The pillow had an indentation in it, the kind your head leaves when you've been sleeping on something regularly. Against the far wall there was a small wooden crate being used as a shelf. On it, a water bottle, a small battery-powered lantern, a paperback book with a cracked spine, a travel-sized deodorant, a folded piece of clothing I couldn't immediately identify. On the floor, near the sleeping bag, a pair of shoes, men's shoes, dark, size 10 or 11 maybe, placed neatly side by side with the toes pointing toward the door as if their owner had just stepped out of them. The room smelled of the smell I had been noticing for 3 weeks. That damp, enclosed smell, the smell of air that belonged to a space that had been lived in with no ventilation for a long time. Someone had been living in this room, behind my bathroom mirror, in my house, while I was here. I do not fully remember the next few minutes. I know I backed out of the bathroom. I know I pulled the mirror shut behind me by instinct, some part of my brain telling me to close it before I did anything else. I know I went to my bedroom and I sat on the edge of my bed and I held my phone in both hands and I could not for a long moment make myself dial. Not because I didn't know what to do. I knew exactly what to do. But my hands were shaking so badly that pressing 3 specific buttons in sequence felt like a task I had forgotten how to perform. I called 911. I told the operator that I had found a hidden room in my house and that someone had been living in it. I told her I did not know if the person was currently in the house. I told her I was in my bedroom with the door locked. She kept me on the line. She was calm and clear, and I held onto her voice like it was something solid in a room that had stopped making sense. The police arrived in 11 minutes. 2 officers cleared the house while a third stayed with me in the kitchen. They checked every room, every closet, the attic, the basement. They checked the hidden room behind the mirror. The person was not there, but everything else was. What the officers found in that room, and what the detective who came later documented carefully, I am going to share with you as plainly as I can because I think plain is the only way to say it. The room had clearly been occupied for an extended period of time. The detective estimated, based on the accumulation of items and the wear on the sleeping bag and pillow, that someone had been living there for somewhere between 2 and 4 months. I had moved in 9 weeks before. The room had likely been occupied before I arrived, and had continued to be occupied every night since. On the wooden crate, in addition to the items I had already seen, the officers found a small notebook. Inside the notebook were dates. Just dates, written in a column, with small notes beside some of them. The dates went back 4 months. The notes were brief. Things like "Hello, quiet," which the detective suggested might mean landlord, and tenant out late, and lights off by 11, and most recently, just 2 weeks before I found the room, a single word that I still think about. New. That was the note beside the date that corresponded to approximately when I had moved in. Just the word new, meaning me. Meaning that whoever this was had watched me arrive, and had noted my arrival in their small notebook, and had continued living 8 feet from my bathroom while I went about my life completely unaware. There were other things in the room that I won't describe in detail because some of them are part of an ongoing investigation that I was asked not to discuss publicly, but I will say this. Among the items found was a small mirror, a hand mirror, the kind you might use to see the back of your hair. It was positioned on the crate at an angle. The detective showed me something I had not noticed when I first opened the mirror door and looked inside. At a certain angle, from a certain position inside that hidden room, you could see through the bathroom mirror. You could see the sink, the tub, the entire bathroom. The mirror above my vanity was two-way glass. I am going to pause here for a moment because I think this is the part of the story where most people need a second to absorb what that means. For 9 weeks, every time I used my bathroom, every morning, every night, every ordinary private moment in that small tiled room, there was a possibility that someone was standing or sitting 8 feet away in the dark, watching through the glass. I don't know if they always watched. I don't know how much of the time that room was occupied when I was in the bathroom. I don't know if they were there every time or only sometimes or rarely. I only know that they could have been, and that I never knew, and that Oliver knew. My cat knew. Every time he sat outside that bathroom door, staring with that focused, unblinking attention, he was not watching a spider or listening to the pipes. He was watching the door because on the other side of it, somewhere close, there was a person. A stranger. A presence his instincts had detected from the very beginning. I had scratched him behind the ears and walked away. The investigation moved forward in the weeks after. I am not going to tell you everything that came out of it, partly because of what I was asked not to disclose, and partly because some of it is still not fully resolved, but I will tell you what I can. The hidden room had not been built recently. The construction dated back to the original house, to the 1950s. Rooms like this were not unheard of in houses of that era, small, concealed spaces used for various purposes, some mundane, some less so. This one had been there since the beginning, and had been known about by certain people and unknown to others throughout the decades the house had changed hands. The landlord claimed he had no knowledge of the room's existence. I did not believe him then. I do not believe him now. The notebook was the most useful piece of evidence. The dates in it, combined with certain other items found in the room, allowed investigators to build a picture of who had been using the space and for how long. I was not the first tenant to have been observed in this way. The dates in the notebook went back years. Years. Before me, before the tenant before me, before them, for years this room had been occupied. The previous tenants who had cycled through every couple of years. The ones I had never thought to ask too much about. I found myself wondering how many of them had noticed the smell and done nothing. How many had heard a sound behind the mirror and told themselves it was the house settling. How many had had a cat that sat outside the bathroom door and stared. How many had come this close to finding it and then walked away. I left the house that night and I never went back. I had a friend come collect my things over the following days. I could not make myself return. I moved into a new apartment, ground floor this time, in a building with no hidden history. I went over every wall, every mirror, every surface before I put a single box down. I pressed my knuckles against every section of wall and listened for hollow sounds. I checked every mirror for hinges. Old habits, new habits, I'm not sure which this is. I still check. Every place I stay, every bathroom I use for the first time, I check the mirror. I press the frame on both sides. I look for hinges. I look for the wear groove that hands leave when they've opened something regularly for a long time. I have not found another hidden room, but I think about how close I came to never finding the first one. 3 more weeks of dismissing the smell, I might never have looked closely at the mirror. 3 more weeks of explaining away the sounds as the house settling, I would have gone on living there indefinitely. I was this close to spending months or years in that house, never knowing. And the thing I keep landing on, the thought that sits in the back of my mind on quiet evenings, is this. If I had never found it, if I had lived there for a year, 2 years, and never found it, would anything have ever happened? Or would they have simply continued living in that room, watching, noting my routines in their little notebook, and eventually leaving the way they apparently always left, quietly, without a trace? I don't know the answer to that question. I'm not sure I want to, but here's what I do know. The house felt safe when I moved in. It felt ordinary and quiet and mine in the way that a home is supposed to feel. I had good light, a small backyard, a landlord who seemed reasonable, a neighborhood where people knew each other's names. It felt safe, and for 9 weeks, while it felt safe, someone was sleeping 8 feet from my bathroom, listening to me move through the house, watching the lights go off at night and go on in the morning, writing down the time I came home, noting the day I arrived with a single word in a small notebook. Knew. Safety is a feeling. It is not always a fact. The space between those two things is where this story lives. And I think about that every time I stand in front of a bathroom mirror, every single time. This has been the dark whisper. Before you go to sleep tonight, check your mirror. Press the frame on both sides. Look for hinges. And if you find a groove in the wood where hands have been, don't open it alone.